Here's one of the few things that new writers struggle with and don't quite understand. Dialogue is the key to great writing. Nerd Nation. Okay, today we're going to talk about dialogue, how to write conversations that feel real, reveal character, and advance the plot. All right, here is the same scene, two different versions, and I think right away you're going to get exactly what I'm driving at. Here's a weak version. I am very upset with you because you lied to me about where you were last night, she said angrily. Versus strong. Now look at the difference here. She set her keys on the counter. So, period. That's the first sentence. So, how was dinner? Right? Question mark. She already knew. That is so much more powerful, even though it is giving out less details because it has subtext in there. We'll talk about that a little bit later. All right, one is a stage direction with quotation marks. The other is dialogue. Today, this is the key difference that we can see. All right, two failure modes that kill your scenes. The core mistake. Writers think about what needs to be communicated, not what the character would actually say. And this is always a struggle. New authors, established authors want to move the story. Things that the reader needs to know, they need to communicate in some way or form. And so it's tempting to do an information dump. Characters say things they already know so the reader can overhear. As you know, Bob, our father died when we were 12 and left us the family business. No human has ever said that sentence because why would you introduce something that they've known for the last 12 years and that they experience themselves? They wouldn't say that, right? So you need to be a little bit more creative in figuring out how to appropriately get that information to the reader. The pleasantries trap. Now, this is the other aspect that can really kill dialogue, mimicking real conversation too faithfully. You don't want actual real conversation. You want the illusion of it, right? Real speech is full of filler. Fiction must be the illusion of conversation, the pressure without the noise. If your scene opens, hey, cut everything before the turn. So essentially the turn is basically all the little pleasantries that we oftentimes do in real conversation. You want to cut that out and start where the conversation starts getting good. Just imagine if you were trying to listen in on someone's conversation, where would you lean forward, right? Where would you get a little bit more interested in what they're saying? It's when the conversation has substance, not the pleasantries. Now, that being said, sometimes the pleasantries can be the powerful elements of the dialogue, right? So you have to know the difference of the two. Sometimes two people avoiding talking about the thing that they should be talking about is the point of the dialogue, right? And that comes with experience, knowing when you're actually pleasantries and you're just wasting all that word space, that word count, versus when it is an apparatus to further the plot of the story. Dialogue is not transcribed conversation. It's the illusion of conversation, the pressure without the noise. Okay, every line must do one of these three things. Now, this is a great litmus test for if your dialogue is punchy, if it is good, right? They reveal character. Now, I believe characters are the best thing in the book that make the strongest, most powerful book. And the best way, or one of the best ways to reveal character is through dialogue. Word choice, sentence rhythm, what they avoid, it all tells us who they are. A nervous character doesn't say, I'm afraid. They change the subject. They make a joke. They ask if you want coffee, right? So that reveals character, and character is one of the most powerful things that you can have in a book. Good characters. All right, they advance the plot. Every dialogue scene should change something: relationship, information, power, decision, right? And this is how you can know. You can diagnose whether it's doing that. What is the difference at the end versus the beginning of that scene or that chapter? What changed fundamentally? The plot, the characters, the future events? If nothing, the scene is treading water, and you don't want to tread water. Now, especially if you're a new author trying to get established, new readers will not tolerate especially nowadays, treading water. A scene just to be a scene just to fill the next 5, 10 pages of the book. That is where you're going to lose the audience. They need to be engaged with that conversation. So it has to advance the plot, or at least do one of these three things. All right, carry subtext. What the character means but doesn't say. The pressure underneath the words. Two people arguing about dishes, but they're really arguing about something else, whether they respect each other, right? So the subtext can be very powerful. It's nuanced, and sometimes readers that aren't engaged as much will lose some of that subtext, but the readers who are will just that will knock their socks off because they are engaged in guessing what is really going on with the story. That is so powerful. Now, ideally, you want to do all three of these things, right? That is the best chapters. That is the best dialogue. That's where you're revealing character, you're advancing the plot, and you have subtext. Now, subtext is most powerful in very emotionally driven scenes, right? Where they're talking about everything else besides what they should be talking about. And they're using words that aren't really or resolving the conversation in a way that would be the most effective, right? But that's building up that tension. Subtext is what the scene is really about. Dialogue is the surface it hides underneath. Okay. All right, writing natural dialogue. Craft techniques that make readers forget their reading. Read it loud. Your ear catches what your eye forgives. If you can't say it comfortably, your character can't either. Listen for lines that are too grammatically perfect. This is so true, so powerful. In fact, one of the things that I do every time I write a book, I usually read it to my kids if it is appropriate for their age, right? And that does two things. One, it sees their reaction. It also helps me practice narrating, which I enjoy doing. But the most important, it lets me say dialogue lines and identify when they're awkward, when they're uncomfortable, when no one would say that, right? And when you hear it, it's much different than reading it. All right, give every character a voice. Cover the names. Can you tell who's speaking? This is a great litmus test for your dialogue to see if it is functioning as it should. Each character needs their own vocabulary, cadence, and what they never mention. Now, as far as the vocabulary goes, you got to take that with a grain of salt, right? You don't want such a distinct vocabulary that, one, it's hard for the reader to track, oh, this is that person speaking. And it's also difficult for you to remember and then write in that style. Sometimes writers go overboard with such nuanced conversation, such dialogue, that it gets difficult to track or even understand. That's when you've gone a little too far. But if there's little nuances, for example, Yesna, in the Titan book, we get introduced to this character, this second book of Acadia, which comes out later this month in July. We get, she says yes instead of saying yes. She has a little bit of an accent. And there's a few other words that she says differently. But it's not overwhelming to the point where the reader's having a hard time understanding, but they will get the point. They have an accent that is a little bit different, right? But that is a vocabulary choice that makes and advances her character and gives her an actual voice. Also, some of the great characters, Horace, Finn, Orch, they have some fantastic lines that really reveal their character. For example, Finn, he uses humor as a defense mechanism. That is his defense mechanism. You'll see that when things start getting a little bit more tense, he starts throwing out more jokes. And sometimes those jokes aren't even funny, but that's how he is coping with that situation. Use deflection and non-answers. A character who never directly answers a question tells you everything. The dodge is characterization. The pivot is subtext, right? So, and we already talked about that. You wouldn't say, I'm so angry at you because you did X, Y, and Z, right? Your actions a lot of time is going to be your dialogue, right? If you slam the keys down and you say, fine, I don't care what you do. And obviously that person does care very much what they do. They just slam their keys down, right? Or maybe they break something that would be normally very valuable to them, right? In maybe not throwing it against the wall and shattering it, but just knocking it over and not even caring about what happens. That is powerful, Powerful dialogue. Let action beats do work. She set the glass down. I love you. She didn't look at him. The action beat is the dialogue, which is what I would just say. So use it. She didn't look at him. She set the glass down, said, I love you. She didn't look at him. I mean, that's some powerful things. When you're saying the phrase, I love you, how many times is it when you're not looking at that person? You're not engaged. That speaks volumes of what is going on in that scene. The difference a beat makes. Here's deflection. Did you take the money? She asked. Yes, I took the money. So that is weak, right? That is basically a conversation that might take place if there was some different context, but it's pretty weak dialogue. Here's much stronger. Did you take the money? He poured himself a drink. You want one? Excellent deflection. Action beats. I love you, she said. Versus strong. She set down the glass. I love you. She didn't look at him when she said it, right? We had already talked about that one. All right. The action beat is the dialogue. It changes what the line means. So expand your definition of dialogue. It includes what is going on with that character, internally, externally, what they're doing. Well, some of the best characters say very little, like Onar the Slayer, that we see a lot of in the second book of the Acadia series. He doesn't say much, but what he does around what he says is the dialogue, and it is pretty potent dialogue. And when he talks, because he uses less words, people tend to listen. And he's a big guy, he might punch you in the face. All right, 4 mistakes that are probably in your manuscript, especially if you're a new or struggling author. On the nose dialogue, characters announce their emotions. I'm angry because you lied. Real people act from emotions, they don't narrate them. The emotions must live in the words, not above them, right? Sometimes that will be said, right? But you should really look at it and say, is that too on the nose dialogue, right? Did you just cut through all the subtext? Did you just kind of let the air or let the tension out of the room because you were just so on the nose with that dialogue? Overusing dialogue tags. This is a huge thing with new authors. They start using he exclaimed, she breathed, he laughed, right? Those are fine, but know that they are not as common as said and asked, right? When you say said and asked, it's essentially invisible. No one really sees it. They just keep reading. They don't even really hear it because it's used so often, right? And you think that good writing would be to diversify in your dialogue tags, but that's not the case. When you say he laughed, he breathed, he exclaimed, a lot of times you're taking away from the effectiveness of the dialogue, right? Because the dialogue should be doing that work, not the voice tag. Now, sometimes it is absolutely necessary if you want to have some of that divergent thing from what they're saying and what they're actually doing. So sometimes it is necessary. So a speed bump, if you think about it, it slows you down on the road. Sometimes as an author, that's exactly what you want to do. You want them to slow at that spot and hit it. But definitely it's something that's 90% of the time, 95% of the time should be said and asked, right? Actually, when I was in a creative writing class in college, I had a teacher read a romance novel that had every other dialogue tag except said and asked. And within half a page, it was exhausting and completely unnecessary. And it became such a speed bump that it became a difficult book to read. Adverb stuffed tags, she said angrily. He whispered nervously. If you add an adverb to explain the motion, the dialogue isn't doing its job. Rewrite the line. We talked a little bit about that already. Too much small talk. Hey, how are you? Good. This is throat cleared. Find the scene where the scene actually turns and cut everything before it. Like I said, this can be necessary. Maybe this is an important part. The small talk is doing the work of them avoiding a tense conversation. Most of the time, 9 out of 10 times, it's not. It's just superfluous, and you just cut it and start where you take the turn, where the conversation really matters. Enter late, leave early. Start at the turn, end before it winds down. Enter late, leave early. There's an old Latin phrase, in media res. I'm completely butchering that. I don't speak Latin. I do enjoy using Latin phrases all the time in my books and saying them, but I'm sure I say them all wrong. but that just means starting in the middle. Enter late. The conversation is much more dynamic if it's a lot of times starting in the middle or just before it gets really intense. If you notice a lot of my chapters, I actually begin in media res. I am beginning in the middle of what is going on. And the reader has to play a little catch up. And part of that is enticing them right away. And they're like, oh, I got to pay attention right from the beginning. Sometimes if you start with a huge description of the landscape and it's so glorious and oh, with the sun and the birds, that can very much well be something that pushes the reader out. And they're like, oh, I don't need to pay attention for another half a page. And some of the more classic writers that we read did that, right? And that's a lesson that has been learned over time, that you want to engage your readers quickly and right away, right? So avoiding that small talk and jumping right into the middle of things is great advice. Now, not always the case. All these rules can be broken, and a good author identifies when they can break the rules and actually accentuate their points instead of diminishing them. But by and large, these are the four mistakes that are probably in your manuscript that would be worth cutting out. Okay, on the nose versus subtext, same moment. On the nose, I'm angry at you because you didn't show up, and that made me feel like I don't matter to you. I don't know who talks like that. Subtext, she didn't turn around. Forget it. Go. She opened the door. Is she really saying forget it? Is she really saying go? Maybe. Does she really want that person to do that? Possibly. But just the action coupled with the words, she's not saying exactly what she's meaning. There is subtext there. This is a much more interesting conversation. Real people act from emotions. They don't narrate them. The emotions must live in the words. All right, so here's some things you can do today. Write the 3-line scene. Write 8 to 10 lines of dialogue. At least one reveals character without stating it. So you want the character to come off the page. Something must change by the end. A relationship, information, power, or a decision. What is changing in that text, that dialogue, right? Include one moment of subtext, a line where the character means more than they say. Powerful writing is subtext. Hard mode. No adverb tags, no on-the-nose declarations, no greeting openers start mid-sentence. Hard mode in the sense that it's difficult to, once you start doing it, if you do it all the time, it becomes much easier. In fact, it starts looking incorrect, or it starts getting difficult to do on-the-nose dialogue because it just sounds so horrible as you start writing it. Okay, if you can write that scene, you understand dialogue. Everything else is practice. All right, 6 rules that will change your dialogue. Dialogue is the illusion of conversation, not a transcript of it. Every line must reveal character, advance plot, or carry subtext, ideally all 3. Subtext is the scene beneath the scene, the pressure underneath the words, protected. This is some of the best, most powerful dialogue comes from this. Enter late, leave early, start at the turn, end before it winds down. Said and asked are invisible. Every other tag is a speed bump. If your dialogue needs an adverb to land, rewrite the dialogue. Okay, episode 5. This is our next episode, point of view and voice. How to choose the right POV and develop a voice so distinct your reader would recognize a paragraph without seeing your name on it. You're becoming an author that is authentic in their text. Anyway, so please, if you enjoyed this one, subscribe, leave a review on my books, or leave a comment below, and visit me at sterlingnixon.com to learn a little bit more about me and the books that I write. Anyway, take care and have a good one.